All right, this morning, a commercial announcement before we begin our presentations, reminding you, since I have this handy brochure to show you, that you could go dig this summer in beautiful Israel, June 16th to July 11th. So, it's Tel Beth Shemesh. It's about 20 miles west of Jerusalem. It's on the, as it says here, the inner edge of the biblical Shephelah. And of course, you might remember the most famous story from Tel Beth Shemesh, being biblical scholars as you all are. This is a place in which the Ark of the Covenant was stolen by those ever naughty Philistines. Naughty? Well, they're at least naughty. So also Samson, you've maybe heard of Samson. Shimshon, if you are more into the biblical Hebrew, had some adventures here as well. By the way, the Philistines decided they would give it back because bad stuff happened to them. You'll have to, I don't want to have a spoiler alert as to what happened, but
They also put like golden boil models inside of it after they're done for rats or something.
well, we can't reveal that here because this is just the tease. You're supposed to go look it up yourself now that we've gotten you interested. So here's our senior staff: Shlomo Bunamovitz, Zev Liederman, Dale Manor, Sean Bubel, University of Lethbridge. And over here you see some happy people excavating. Over here. That could be you. Buckets, brushes, trowels. Field school, teaching you how to dig. 18 years old to go, 16 if accompanied by parent. Don't think you have to worry about that in this room. So here's where to contact. I would recommend you contact me. I have the application already. I can send it to you now quickly and talk to you about any details. So we got a palace. Look at this scarab here. It's nice. Some nice, looks like bichrome ware. And you can go for 2 weeks or 4 weeks. Of course, you get to dig. You get to touch ancient things for no extra charge. And the cost is $2,800 for 4 weeks. So that's roughly $700 a week. I think the minimum stay they want is 2 weeks. So you could pick, it seems you can pick the 2 weeks that you would like between the 16th and the 11th. All right? So if you would like to do that, send me an email. Whether you're here in the room or not in this room at this time, you are invited. So let me know. Any questions about that? There is one question from the floor, yes.
As I remember from past discussions.
Past discussion.
So last year they did Shechem.
Yeah.
So were they planning on doing Shechem again this year, or were they planning on changing things up? Because I know it's like they don't include Dr. Strange on there.
No, he's not on here. Yeah, this is a whole new world. This is Tel Beth Shemesh. Yeah. Yeah, there has been a slight change since last year. Still Israel, still getting to see the wonderful countryside connected with the Holy Scriptures, both the Old and the New Testament, both the Hebrew Bible and those epistles of Paul. But mostly, this is more Old Testament focused site than a New Testament focused site. Any other questions? No? I seeing none. All right, this morning, our archaeological site is Rome, the city o' Rome. Sans
Meaning
form.
without.
That means without. That's right. All right, go right ahead.
So, this is Rome, sans form.
Sans form.
A little bit of an interesting thing to talk about, considering the form's usually the most popular part of
It is.
Rome.
That's why I gave you
So
the rest.
you made it a little more difficult on me than I've.
No,
I'm just messing.
I would never do that.
So, how did what originally started as a little series of cities by the Tiber River, become one of the greatest empires in ancient history? That's not a rhetorical question. We actually don't know that well. So, what we do have an estimation of is that Rome originally started in either the 8th century or 10th century BC, with the safest estimation being the 8th century. It started off, like I said earlier, as these small settlements that were scattered throughout Italy by the Tiber River that were forced to unite and eventually developed a republic, and then after the republic, an empire. So it was a pretty cool empire. Unfortunately, it didn't last as long as it could have, in my estimation. But its architecture's still around, so that's cool. So, oh, hold on, let me get it in that screen. So the Roman people. Now, the Roman people actually can sort of be tied to an earlier group of people called the Etruscans. They borrowed their culture, their alphabet, and even aspects of their religion from these Indo-European people. Under the Etruscan rule, settlements throughout Italy were forced to unite because the Etruscans were conquering them, forcing all people with similar languages to sort of group into more centralized kingdom. But eventually, the original people, the Romans throughout the Tiber, overthrew the Etruscans and then just continued their tradition of conquering other people and uniting into a larger kingdom. This is probably a lot different than the foundation myth that you hear of Rome a lot, which is Romulus and Remus. Do you guys know about that, more or less? So Romulus and Remus, more specifically Romulus, probably actually represented a few real kings, not just one guy. He was, because a lot of architectural and even scientific developments in Roman history are attributed to him, even though it's impossible that he could have been around for each century that they happened. So he was probably actually based off of a lot of other not as well documented kings, because the Romans needed some sort of basis for their history. And hold on, let me move on a little bit. A little more talking about how the Roman Empire expanded. But now, before it was an empire, it was this small kingdom run by those unknown kings that we don't know too much about. But some conflicts with other surrounding countries eventually led these kingdoms to unite even more. And by the end of 200 BC, Rome had actually conquered most of Italy, and even some areas in a little northern part of Europe, with fighting later on with, I think it was the Punic Wars. But the biggest expansion, as you can see, happened during the more imperial age, and that was under the rule of Caesar Augustus. And he conquered a lot of sort of Central and Western Europe. Now, the expansion was prompted by wars with the Gauls and the Celts, who were, I guess they'd be, a lot of them would be modern-day French. But even though the capital of Rome would sort of move around throughout history, the most of the base of operations remained in Italia, or Italy. I'm trying to remember what Italia stood for. It's like something where meant land where they graze. I'm not sure. But this was also not to last. The Roman Empire eventually fell in 476 AD, And this was caused by a series of sort of incremental bad decisions. Because they loved to conquer, they had a lot of conflict, and that runs your taxes dry. And when your taxes are running dry, you want to increase your income, so that means higher taxes. Now, slavery, this is what we normally point to as one of the big problems in the Roman Empire. People don't like being slaves. That's pretty obvious. But also, I would say serfdom was a big issue, because though the Roman Empire had serfdom later on, it didn't always necessarily practice it. It always had slavery, but serfdom was a little different, because that meant the plebeians, people who were still citizens but maybe not so great, they were also beginning to take on the role of these impoverished slave-like people. And that also makes people upset. And unemployment. You can't accrue taxes if you don't have people working jobs. And disease. As cities begin to grow in population and just get denser and closer together, you're going to have a lot of diseases that just make things hard to handle. So that's how they destroyed themselves. Unfortunately, though, they left behind a lot of cool stuff. So we get to talk about their excavation a little bit. So Roman archaeology is interesting. It began as early as the 15th century AD. And it started by a guy named Flavio Biondo, who wrote a detailed map of all the ancient Roman roads and architecture. And in his Le History del Biondo, however, thorough excavations, like people actually digging for artifacts, stuff like that, began in the 18th century. And that same tradition of archaeology continues on today. So, despite centuries of excavation, Rome still has a lot of relatively undisturbed sites. Rome's largest public park, for instance, the Parco degli Acquedoti, still has unexamined ruins in it that people know, like they've seen them, they just decided not to dig around in them for some reason. So, hold on. In fact, there are so many just areas of Roman infrastructure that have been unexplored that they're finding new places on accident. The best example being the Roman subway project. Now, modern day Italy is just trying to make an underground subway for Italians to use, and they keep on running into these ancient burial sites and these ancient barracks, and just recently an ancient house that belonged to sort of a nobleman. So it's kind of interesting to me that an empire that was able to make these things that just lasted for so long wasn't that great at lasting themselves. But nonetheless, it's just cool to have these people that were outlasted by their structure and their architecture. And it is interesting to try to do this without speaking about the forum, but I hope I did a good job. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it is a challenge, but I think you hit upon the really interesting thing in recent times has been this subway. And that is ongoing. So there will be new discoveries there. You know, they built a subway in Athens, and it had similar repercussions as well. And in London. So, you know, you have to keep your eyes open. You can see archaeological things everywhere. You know, some people say, oh, well, you know, it's only in certain places. No, I mean, you can see it a lot. Right here in Florida, we have archaeology, right? You wouldn't think so. You know, my only regret is that the Romans never made it to North America. That would make my life a lot easier.
Are we sure they didn't?
Aha! Or did they? Or did they not?
Wasn't there a guy who was trying to prove Egyptians made it to North America? So he built a boat out of like all reeds from the Nile and sailed it across the Atlantic.
Yeah, there's been a lot of that. Also, especially Phoenicians. So Phoenicians have made a lot of news, I don't know, about being here in North America, sailing to the Mississippi River and the One person said the Colorado River. I heard a guy give a paper on the Phoenicians on the Colorado River one time. That was kind of interesting. So yeah, this goes to the heart of a argument, I guess, a scholarly disagreement over how do ideas diffuse? How do ideas, in other words, if we see a pyramid in Egypt and if we see a pyramid in Mexico, does that mean that the Egyptians came to Mexico and built the pyramid or taught people how to build the pyramids? This is called the diffusion idea, that all the ideas came in one place and then they diffused. They went from that central location, that is the Middle East, to the rest of the world. That's a very popular idea. My doctor grandfather, the Germans have a way of calling someone your doctor father. Your doctor father is your, what we might call our mentor when you get your PhD, the person that you studied with, the person who became your father in academics, so to speak. For me, that was Dr. Edwin Yamauchi, longtime professor at Miami University in Ohio, and quite a scholar in a variety of areas. But his doctor father was a guy named Cyrus Gordon. And Cyrus Gordon taught at New York University and Brandeis University for many years, and trained not only Dr. Yamauchi, but a host of other scholars of that generation. Dr. Cyrus Gordon was a diffusionist. He looked for connections of how ideas diffused. Now, I don't know if he would have bought Phoenicians on the Colorado River, but he did look for this idea that ideas sort of started in the Middle East, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and then they moved out from there, and he looked for connections. For example, like with the Romans, the idea that the Etruscans would have been sea people who would have come from the Middle East and brought their ideas with them. Well, one of the interesting things that might be a connection between, say, Mesopotamia and the Romans, for example, is that the Romans, we might say, are superstitious because they're always looking for signs and clues. For example, if birds fly at you from the left, if you're contemplating a decision, I think I'm going to go do this, or we should go into battle, or we should do this or that, and then birds flying from the left, better not do it. Why? Because the birds from the left is a sign of disapproval from the gods. Anything from the left is negative. Anybody in here left-handed? There you go. Two? We got two lefties. What's that? Ambidextrous. Well, a lot of parents try to force their child to write right-handed, do stuff right-handed when they seem to be going to the left hand as a child. Sometimes even tying their arm down or tying it behind them, making them do things with their other hand. It's happened. Well, obviously the majority of people are right-handed. So that's part of it. But that's not it. That's not all of it. For the Romans, things that are on the right side are good. Things that are on the left side are bad. You know the Latin word for left? Sinister. Sinister, evil, something bad. So anything that came from the left was bad. Now, another practice that the Romans had was cutting open animals, in their case especially birds, and looking at their innards to get a prognostication of the will of the gods. What's that?
Is it called thaumaturgy?
Yes. There's also hypascopy, which is the looking at livers, especially, like the hepatic system. So anyway, the Romans do that. They cut things open and look at their entrails. Sometimes the livers, sometimes other things. They had priests that would do that, and they could read, I'm down doing air quotes, read the innards, you know, as we'd say in Kentucky, innards, gizzards, I don't know, whatever they had in there. And then, you know, they could read it. Now, that seems a strange thing to be looking at livers and deciding the future. Guess who else does that? Babylonians. Mesopotamia, the priests there would especially cut open sheep, look at their livers, they could read the bumps, the shapes, whatever, and they could tell you sort of the future, divine, the will of the gods, from the livers. Cyrus Gordon looked at something like that, and he said, you know, those are both pretty peculiar things that you might accidentally or randomly come upon. So he believed there was a connection. And then, of course, you take a look at the influence of the Etruscans. The Etruscans, if you look at their history back, which of course is a bit mysterious, appear to be one of the Sea Peoples. The Sea Peoples come from the coast of the Middle East, all right? And so then he devised there must be some connection between Mesopotamia and Italy via the Etruscans, who were one of these so-called Sea Peoples. That's diffusion look, right? Diffusionary. The other is, which is more popular today with many people, you know, because we like everybody to be autonomous. That's sort of it's very in vogue, as Madonna would say, is to be autonomous. So you don't know what that is, in vogue. But you'll have to go back and research old Madonna videos for that. Probably you shouldn't, but you would have to if you wanted to get that particular reference, which you probably shouldn't. Anyway, it's very in vogue. You'll look up, just look Vogue with Madonna, and you'll see the little video, and you'll see what she does there. But no, don't do it off campus, of course, if you're going to do it.
Stay in the school's Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I don't think it's SEU approved. Madonna is probably never approved by SEU. I don't know. I would think not. Anyway, that song is fairly mild, though, as Madonna songs go, as far as I know. Not that I'm a Madonna aficionado by any stretch of the imagination. Now, Cardi B, she got her Grammy.
She did.
See, I knew you would know. Anyway, the other way that we can take a look at this is we see that it is independent. That's what I'm trying to say. So if somebody comes up with a pyramid here and a pyramid there, or this kind of way or this kind of way, they each came up with that idea themselves. It's independently, and there is no connection between them. So these are the two popular views. More popular is that second view, that everybody independently. Now, you know, when it comes to pyramids in Mexico and pyramids in Egypt, well, of course, the pyramids in Mexico are nothing like the pyramids in Egypt. So to think that the Egyptians were the ones that built them or somehow caused them to be built in some way seems very strange to me, because they're not of the same purpose. They're not for burials. They're for sacrifice. You know, they have stairs on the outside. You're supposed to walk up to the top and perform rituals. You're not supposed to do that with a pyramid. Now, if you want to make a connection, I would say the pyramids of Mexico, the so-called pyramids of Mexico, are much more like the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. So if you wanted to say somehow they're connected to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, I would at least think that makes more sense to me. I'm not saying that happened. I'm not saying that's true. But at least there's a parallel that makes some sense.
So like saying when people from Mesopotamia migrated into Asia and over the, what is it, Beringer Land Bridge, down into the Americas, they brought that stories of these big tall hills.
Well, now, you know, we don't like to pick on people. But if you want to look for a group that is a cultural diffusionist, look no further than Utah. The Mormons teach, you know, I know as you guys memorize the Book of Mormon, as you usually do, that it's a musical, yeah. You have to memorize your parts if you're going to be in the musical. But they believe that one of the, sort of like 10 lost tribes, one of the leaders of a tribe actually sailed from Mesopotamia, well, from Israel, right, from the Red Sea, and sailed all the way across the Atlantic and landed in South America, and then, of course, came to the Americas that way, and brought with them all the religion of Israel and all that stuff, you know, and then got into a battle over here, lots of battles, into which the Neophytes were almost wiped out. So they had to write down their history on golden tablets, which they happened to bury in beautiful Palmyra, New York, upstate New York, lovely part of the country, and buried them there until, as they would call him, the prophet Joseph Smith, found them and dug them up, translated them for us in a barn, behind a curtain, using the Uman and the Thummim, and he...
Which he has.
Well, you know, he kind of looked, as one depiction, he kind of looks through them like they're glasses, like little lenses. I don't know. And then he dictates it to a guy who writes it down, another guy. And that is the Book of Mormon. Now there is diffusion for you. All right, now the Roman Forum.
All right, so you guys just heard about all of Rome but the Forum. So here we go. Let's wrap this up.
What is it?
What was it? Well, it was known in Latin as the Forum Romanum, and it was located right at the center, at the heart of the city of Rome. And it was also kind of the center of day-to-day life. Like, this was the place to be for most citizens. That's where everything was going on. It's called one of, if not the most celebrated meeting place in history. And
That's fair.
yeah, and it's arguably the most important part of the city itself.
Sorry, Wayne.
What was the purpose? Well, as I mentioned, people to socialize. There were trials, public speeches, markets, stuff to buy, stuff to sell. There's political rallies and gladiator matches and other spectacles. So literally,
Actually, that picture's of the Trevi Fountain.
oh, I mean, that came up.
Not Roman.
Oh, it came up
And
from
not
the
in a
Roman
forum.
Forum.
But that's okay. It's a beautiful fountain, nonetheless.
It is a nice fountain. I guess it came up when I Googled Roman Forum, so.
That's the place where you throw the coins over your shoulder.
Right.
And then if you do that, you know, then you'll come back to Rome. You'll fall in love with the person. And then you'll be
that how it
arrested
works?
for assault. Okay, go ahead.
Anyway. Okay, so the history of the Forum. Well, the Forum kind of had three different parts to it throughout history. It was the kingdom, then it went the Republic, then the Empire. So when it first started in the Roman kingdom, it was established around the 7th century BC, and allegedly, as the Romans tell it, the Forum itself began with the alliance between Romulus and his enemy at the time, Titus Tatius. And the story goes that each of the leaders controlled one hill. Then beneath the hill, there was kind of like a little wetland where the Forum would eventually take place. And these two leaders, they decided to make an alliance, and so they decided to meet in the middle between the two hills. And that's kind of where the idea.
So what they're going to have to do is very popular today. It's called drain the swamp.
Exactly. So they quite literally drained the wetland and drained the swamp, and that's when the Roman Forum began. And during the time of the kingdom, it kind of just started off as a small market for people to kind of purchase goods there. But as the population of the city started to grow, the Forum had to grow with it. So that brings us to the second part of the Forum's history, which was during the Roman Republic. And so at this point, the population had already grown significantly, and it became the center of everything social, judicial, and political life. It was during this time when political meetings and rallies first started occurring, and since as I mentioned, the population just kept expanding, the Senate decided to expand the actual area of the forum itself, so they made the entire thing bigger. This is when judicial stuff started happening. So they made tribune benches. There were trials starting to occur. Another big part about this time was that most of what we see today is reminiscent of this because it's when marble and paved stones were added. So that's why it was able to last so long, because of the great architecture. And yeah, it lasted for thousands of years. So the last part of its history was during the Roman Empire. So it was during this time that the Forum reached its height. There was a ton of grand buildings. There was a lot of temples. One of the more well-known ones is the Temple of Divus Iulius. I think that's how you pronounce that. There was also
You know who that is, don't you?
he was an emperor.
Technically, no.
Oh, I don't know.
That's Julius Caesar.
Oh.
The divine Julius, see?
Oh, I guess. Oh, yeah, that makes
So
sense.
I suppose, he was thought to be a king or emperor, but I guess technically he was,
dictator.
yeah, for life.
Kind of,
Yeah.
kind of took what he wanted. Yeah, there were some other grand buildings like the Arch of Augustus, the Arch of Septimus Severus. There was a bunch of memorials added and other temples like the Temple of Saturn. The last person to actually add to the Forum was Constantine the Great, and the last expansion took place in 312 AD. So when that was the last expansion, it was nothing but downhill from there. So that's when it started to fall. And obviously it went with the collapse of the Roman Empire. So, design. So as I mentioned earlier, it's located right at the heart of the city, so it was easy access for everyone to get there. It was designed in a rectangular shapes, situated in between the Palatine and Capitoline hills, and it was consistent with the rest of the grid-like pattern of the city. So Rome was set up actually just like our cities now, was set up in a grid-like pattern because it was the easiest, most efficient way, and they built the Forum to match that. All right, the Colosseum. So, if everyone has probably heard of the Colosseum, it's, I would say, probably the most famous landmark in the entire world.
A bold statement.
Bold statement.
Perhaps could be.
I feel confident making that statement.
All right.
It could seat between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators.
That's the way you should make a bold statement.
Right.
With full confidence.
Right. And with a maximum of 80,000 spectators, that was unheard of at the time. Like that almost rivals some stadiums that we have today. So that's crazy. And they had a lot of things that took place there. The famous gladiator fights. They also had animal hunts. They did executions. They even did battle reenactments. And this part, chariot races, and I found this part really cool, that they would actually have mock sea battles. They would literally flood the Colosseum with water and have ships fight each other in the Colosseum, which I thought was really cool, and the fact that they were able to do that.
I like that.
Yeah. And
See that.
yeah, and I didn't mention this in the slide, but beneath the Colosseum itself, that's where a lot of I guess stuff was found. Like they were able to determine how they were able to flood the Colosseum. That's where animals were held. That's where gladiators were held before the fight. And I would say that beneath the Colosseum itself is just as sophisticated as the actual part above.
Sure. They would bring the animals and the gladiators up.
Right.
Kind of crank them up to the floor level.
And then you would have them open the gate and then go.
Yes.
I was just gonna say, were the sea battles like sort of blood sport, or was it just like a play?
Well, it was kind of like it was a spectacle. Like no one was really meant to die in it, but I'm sure people did die.
Collateral damage.
It was kind of like the same with the gladiators, because like a lot of the gladiators didn't actually die that fought in the arena. Like a lot of the time, they survived. Yeah, believe it or not. Believe it or not, the movies aren't too
the
accurate.
people were given the chance to liberate
Right.
the defeated
Right.
gladiator. Sometimes here's the thing, if the guy put on a good show, if the guy was a good fighter, then they would release him so they could come back and see him again.
Right.
Like Tom Brady. You could kill him off right away, or let him come back for another game.
And the best gladiators made the most money, so no one, the people in
And
charge
of
themselves
course,
wouldn't want to
the
kill them.
ladies
That's true.
were especially interested in the gladiators. Okay, go ahead.
All right. Temples. So, Romans were big on their religion, and the Forum had a lot of the temples that in the city. So I just listed a bunch. There's the Temple of Vesta, Jupiter, Optimus Maximus, Saturn, Castor and Pollux, Concord. Most of these are temples to the gods, but what took place at the temples were sacrifices, other rituals to hoping they'd bring good omens, try and get signs, as we kind of talked about earlier, actually. But it was to gain favor from the gods, and also to grant good fortune to anyone who would enter the temples. Come on, there we go. All right, excavations. So the first kind of known, relatively modern sketches we have of the Forum were first made in the 17th century. That was when people were kind of first started to really map it out. But the excavations first started around the 1800s, but they didn't officially begin until 1898. So it was actually relatively recently in the grand scheme of things. We haven't really been excavating this place for that long. But the excavations, along with unearthing all the buildings and cool stuff that they had there, it was also about restoring the stuff that was already intact, because a lot of it had crumbled throughout the centuries. And it's a big piece of history. We have to try and preserve it. Present day. So it's the Forum has become a big tourist hotspot for a lot of people across the world. Over 4.5 million people visit the Forum every year. I mean, because everyone wants to see it. The rooms are really cool.
You have to pay to get in.
You do have to pay to get in. I saw that.
Just think of that. 4.5 million times. You got to pay to get in.
It's honestly like a great source of revenue for Italy, for the government. But the ruins still serve as an amazing source of information. Like, we would not know nearly as much about the lives of Romans as we do now if it wasn't for the Forum and everything that we discovered there. And excavations and restorations are still being made, like, as we speak right now. But new discoveries are also being made. Like, there are still lots of parts of it that we may know about it, we haven't really studied it into detail. And like a relatively recent discovery, it was thought that Rome was, I think it was the most popular opinion was that Rome wasn't created until like the 7th century about. But recent discoveries that we made in the Forum itself dated back to the 8th or 9th century BC. So probably probably like 100 or 200 years later than we even thought it was, than we even had thought it existed at that point. And that was made that revelation was made recent. I think it was in 2013, I believe. So yeah, we're still making lots of new cool. We're still learning a lot because of the stuff that we're finding in the Forum. And yeah, that's my presentation of the Forum.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions and or comments about Rome with the Forum and nothing else? All right, very good. Very good, very informative. I hope you learn something, not only as you prepare these, but as you present them and as we hear them. I wanted to go back to this drawing just for a second to make sure you know what you're seeing here. Yeah. So let's
Come on.
Right, recording started.
This is a map of the Forum, despite what anyone else might think. Rome is built on 7 hills. Now notice down here, it's the Circus Maximus. Anybody know what that is? The Circus Maximus. We did not. Yes,
That's for racing.
it is. It's for chariot races. It's the largest venue in the city, and of course, it's right there in the center. There were depictions of, records of teachers complaining about the great noise that was caused by the Circus Maximus, and the students couldn't study. They couldn't focus on their work because they were distracted by other things. Here is the Colosseum, and these are the the hills that overlook the Forum.
Let me guess, the person in charge of them was biggest Dickus. No, he was in Judea.
So we see, for example, at this end is where the museum, the Capitoline Museum is. An excellent museum. All right, here's a Google image of Rome. You can see the Tiber. And here is the Insula Tiberium. That just means the Tiber Island. And close to the Tiber Island, then, you see the Palatine. This is the Palatine Hill. And there's the Colosseum. And so up here, then, is the museum I was just talking about. Here's the Arch of Titus. Let me just see if I zoom in on the old Arch of Titus. How close in can we get to it? Yeah, that's getting pretty close. This is a yeah, wow. Getting really, really close on top now. What if I click it? And then we can see pictures of it. Anyway, the Arch of Titus, of course, for the Emperor Titus, has depictions of the items that taken from the temple, because it's Titus who actually destroys the temple. It's under his leadership anyway.
Did you
Well,
put in the street view?
What's that?
The street view.
Let's see, where's that at? Here. No.
Drag where you want to stand.
Oh, I got to drag this guy over here. Boop. There we go. Whoa. Now what? Okay.
Yes.
These people are Goober fans.
Now can I move him? How do I move him? Can't move him. Okay. Oh, I can zoom in. There. There's the Arch of Titus. Yeah, that's, whoa. Yeah, that's, this will kind of make you really good after you eat lunch. There's usually a lot of people there just like that. And it's very hot there. Yes. That's all right. Yeah, we're ending right now.
Oh, never mind. Cool, I'll sit here.
Oh. Don't have, oh, they canceled it. Well, anyway, we need to end anyway, because